Shabbat Shalom. Again, our deep thanks to Margie Miller and to her late husband Morgan, in whose name this Scholar in Residence weekend has been established. Margie, we're so glad you can be with us here this evening as we celebrate Shabbat and as we welcome our guest scholar, Rabbi Dr. Wendy Zierler. When I first arrived at Hebrew Union College for rabbinical school, I had, as an undergraduate, been an English major with a minor in Jewish studies. And so when I learned that there was a professor on the faculty who taught modern Jewish literature, I was naturally very interested and intrigued. And it wasn't until I took Dr. Zierler's core curricular course, that is, on modern Jewish literature that I found just how hooked I would be. In the tenure that I had at the school, I took every course that Dr. Zierler had to offer, with the exception of one. I never took movies and midrash. That's one I'll have to get the book for, and encourage you all to get the book for as well, because it's evidently a great way to study and to learn. More importantly, though, than Dr. Zierler's incredible scholarship and the amazing things that I learned from her in her class was the way that she led the classroom environment. We had, by the end of our time together, developed a little cohort of people who just loved to study with you. And every Thursday afternoon at 3 p.m., those of us who were sort of literarily minded would come together under the foot of our sage, of our Rav, and learn together. It was really an intimate environment, and one that was transformative not only for the mind, but for the heart and for the soul. So let me now more formally introduce Rabbi Dr. Wendy Zierler. Rabbi Zierler is Sigmund Falk Professor of Modern Jewish Literature and Feminist Studies at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in New York City. She received her PhD and her MA from Princeton University and her BA from Stern College of Yeshiva University, as well as an MFA in fiction writing from Sarah Lawrence College. In June of 2021, she received rabbinic ordination from Yeshivat Maharat. She's the author of Movies and Midrash, Popular Film and Jewish Religious Conversation, which was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award, and also author of the book And Rachel Stole the Idols, The Emergence of Hebrew Women's Writing. She's also authored, edited, and translated many other articles and books in the fields of Jewish literature and in Jewish gender studies. Please welcome now Rabbi Dr. Wendy Zierler.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I'm so moved to hear my students sing, to do that beautiful rendition of Leah Goldberg's Lamdani, Benji Schiller's rendition of Leah. Anyway, lots of pride coming from these corners here, seeing my former students be the sterling, beautiful professionals that you are. So those of you who have read my biography know that I'm a professor of modern Jewish literature and a writer, and not a dermatologist. So given that, I never would have expected that I would have put together an entire weekend of talks about this skin disease called tzara'at under the guise of the heading Poetry and Pandemics. But as a professor of modern Jewish literature, it's often my scholarly habit to consider how modern writers can recognize themselves in the Jewish literary past and reshape it for the present and for the future. And these past 2+ years of COVID have sent me literally scurrying for every possible Jewish literary response to illness and pandemic, including teaching a course on this very topic this past semester at HUC. The Jewish literary past begins in the Bible, but strangely enough, given the ubiquity of illness and pandemics in human history, there aren't that many accounts of illness in the Bible. We never hear about how our matriarchs or patriarchs get sick, what it is that causes them to die. Here and there in the Bible, epidemics flare as a form of punishment. So coming up next week, we'll see that the 10 plagues include boils and cattle illness, which the Israelites are happily spared. And in response to Korach's rebellion in Numbers 16 to 17, there's a flash epidemic of some sort that Aaron miraculously cures by waving around some incense. More than specific accounts of illness, however, the Bible teems with legal and narrative descriptions and accounts of tzara'at, this skin disease. So Jewish illness discussion, Jewish literary discussion of illness and healing basically begins with sickness of the skin. When I think about skin, my mind takes me back to the time when I was a camper at Jewish summer camp in Canada, where the staff had this penchant for waking us up in the morning to Alan Sherman songs. I don't know how many of you remember Alan Sherman, that parody songwriter, a comedy writer who wrote such parodies as Alan Yetta to the tune of Alouette, or Hallo Mata, Hallo Fada, set to Poncinelli's Dance of the Hours. But the song, the Alan Sherman song that sticks out in my head the most from those days of camp morning wake-ups was a particular number called Skin. And this is my Shabbos gift for you. Ready? I know that they're the musical theater types in the shul, so here you go. You gotta have skin. All you really need is skin. Skin's the thing that if you got it outside, it helps keep the insides in. It covers your nose, and it wraps around your toes. And inside it you put lemon meringue, and outside you hang your clothes. Skin is what you feel at home in, and without it, furthermore, both your liver and abdomen would keep falling on the floor, and you'd be dressed in your intestine. So this song was a parody of another famous song called Heart from the show Damn Yankees. Heart asserted in good American spirit that all you needed in life or in baseball was pluck, resilience, and determination. In other words, heart. Alan Sherman mischievously insisted to the contrary, that the shell mattered too, not just the core, that a person needed not just heart, but skin. The companion Torah portion of Tazria from last week and Metzora from this week are all about the importance of skin, specifically about what happens when its integrity or purity is compromised by eruptions or scale diseases, as scholar Jacob Milgram prefers to translate the word tzara'at. In order to understand the significance of tzara'at as a paradigmatic Jewish illness, therefore, we need first to consider the biological, social, and anthropological significance of skin. Alan Sherman tells us very succinctly that skin's the thing that if you got it outside, it helps keep the insides in. In other words, it serves as a borderline, a means of keeping bodies, entities, and categories apart. Mary Douglas, the famous British anthropologist and scholar of the book of Leviticus, explains very elegantly that the concern in the laws of Tzara'at and Leviticus as a whole is about boundaries, structures, and containers. And she shows how this concern for boundaries expresses itself not just in the details of the law, but also in the literary form of the book. In Tazria and Metzora, the Torah presents these laws about tzara'at through a literary structure of containment or covering, involving a series of concentric repetitions, rhetorical structures of repetition. So let me explain to you what I mean by this. Leviticus 13 from last week, the Parsha of Tazria, begins with the diagnosis of tzara'at that afflicts the skin. And then it repeats this diagnosis with a focus on the bodily extremities, on the head and on the hair. And then it moves outward from there to clothing. And then it moves outward from there to the walls of one's house, Metzora, the next parasha, this week's parasha, provides the details of how to purify each one of these concentric circles of tzara'at in the same order, and then as if to create a rhetorical structure to reinforce this notion of boundary or skin, Leviticus 14 begins and ends almost identically. The words zot tiyeh Torah Metzora. These will be the laws of the Metzora. That's the way the laws begin. The words zot Torah Tzarat, these are the laws of Tzarat, mark the end. So this rhetorical structure mirrors the function of healthy skin as a container or a border, one that helps keep the insides in and the outsides out. These laws reflect a certain anxiety on the part of the priestly author that if something afflicts the skin, that if this ultimate marker of human boundaries is afflicted, then it's as though the world is turned inside out. And for that reason, those people whose very bodies mark that breach, those people threaten the existence of our sense of intact borders, and therefore must be relegated to a kind of mini exile outside the camp. But this is only one part of the story, this notion of the skin as a boundary, as a way of keeping things apart and of keeping entities apart. In fact, our tradition reflects another conception of skin, not as a zone of boundary, but as a zone of contact. Not as a marker of strict separation and individuation, but of mediation. It is these other forms of symbolism around skin that I would like to explore with you now, and in fact, throughout this weekend. As skin scientist Nina, I didn't even know that was a thing, by the way, but as skin scientist Nina Jablonski explains in her book, Skin, A Natural History, our skin is more than a defensive shield and a gatekeeper. The pores and nerve endings of our skin unite us with our surroundings. Skin is the interface through which we touch one another and sense much of our environment. Through our skin, we feel the smooth cold of melting ice, the warm and gentle breeze of a summer evening, the annoying pinch of an insect bite, the humbling pain of a scraped knee, the soft and calming feel of a mother's hand, the thrill of another's touch. Tazria Metzora, so these companion Torah portions, reflect, I would argue, a similar awareness. The laws of Tzarat, as examined thus far, as I've outlined up until now, reinforce the role of skin as a barrier or a boundary. But the Hebrew word roots, and I am at the very beginning and at the end, my role for some of the people here is a professor of Hebrew. The Hebrew word roots that are used throughout these companion parshiot in relation to skin and its disorders underscore the role of skin not just as a border, but also as a medium of communication and of mediation. The word nega, for example, which appears in chapter 13 of Leviticus no less than 40 times, and which is typically translated as a plague, that word nega derives from the Hebrew word, verb root nun gimel ayin, which means to touch. Our skin, our first line of human defense in vulnerability, is also our means of experiencing and reaching out to other people. We get negaim, plagues, afflictions, because we're creatures of touch, because our very skin serves as an invitation and a host to others. The teeming repetition of the word nega in this chapter, and those of you who will be staying for later will see just how many times this word appears in the text, itself serves as a kind of verbal representation of the ubiquity of touch and contact. We are all touched all over, all the time, physically, emotionally, our skin serving as a kind of synecdoche for our very selves. Similar observations can be made about the Hebrew word or, which means skin or leather, throughout these 2 chapters of Leviticus. The word or recalls the Hebrew verb le'orer, which means to arouse, lehit orer, which means to wake up, or leha'ir, which means to comment, presumably in response to something that someone else said. Our skin, our or, through its interface with others, is a site of continual awakening and interaction. Even more striking is the relationship between the word basar, which means either flesh or skin, another word that proliferates in Leviticus 13, and the Hebrew verb levaser, which means to announce or proclaim news. We proclaim or send tidings, besorot, by mouth, which is one of the few openings, large openings, in our skin. A mivaser, someone who is a bringer of tidings, stands at the very borderline between sadness, joy, and knowledge. The hope for besorot tovot, good tidings, appears all over the traditional Siddur. For example, in a series of blessings that are recited after the lifting of the Torah on Mondays and Thursdays after Torah reading, blessings that I lead every Monday and Thursday at our daily minyan, and which have taken on a kind of heightened meaning over the course of the pandemic and most recently, the war in Ukraine. In these blessings, we beseech God in heaven to have compassion on us and on our refugee remnant, and to keep destruction and plague away. We pray that it would be God's will, shenishma v'nitbaser besorot tovot yeshuot v'nechamot, that we hear glad tidings, salvation, and consolation. Similarly, at the end of the Birkat HaMazon, the grace after meals, we asked the merciful God, Harachaman, to send us Elijah the prophet, the harbinger of the Messiah, as he is portrayed in the Haftarah for Shabbat Hagadol, which we are observing this Shabbat, that Elijah the prophet, Yevaser lanu besorot v'nechamot, that Elijah will bring us good tidings and consolation. So it is that same root, basar, bet sin resh, that is used over and over again in Leviticus 13 to mark a pathological breach in the skin. That same root is used to suggest a happy turn of fate, a moment not of desolation, but of redemption. It's a complicated, perhaps disturbing proposition to speak of good tidings in the context of illness, suffering, and misfortune. Doing so runs the risk of rushing too quickly to turn something very bad into something very good. And yet this proposition is at the heart of our religious tradition. Over and over again, biblical and rabbinic tradition tell us stories of redemption and redemptive tidings that feature at their center, paradoxically, a Metzora or a group of Metzoraim. Tonight and tomorrow, God willing, I'm so grateful for this opportunity to be studying and learning with you. We'll look at a number of these stories and modern responses to them, stories that can serve as a usable past and a source of redemption and healing for these pandemic and war-torn times. Shabbat shalom, everybody.